us on World Report. Let's make a start with the top stories. US President Donald Trump has imposed Ukraine-related sanctions on Russian oil giants Lukoil and Rosneft, targeting companies that fund the Kremlin's war machine. The US Treasury Department says further action is possible, calling for a ceasefire in Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Ministry has slammed US energy sanctions, calling them counterproductive to peace efforts in Ukraine. Spokeswoman Maria Zakharova maintained that Russia's goals in Ukraine remain unchanged and stressed that the root causes of the conflict must be addressed. EU leaders are to show strong support for Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky at Brussels summit, discussing use of frozen Russian assets for $163 billion repatriation loan to Ukraine. The EU also plans a new sanctions package against Russia, including a ban on Russian LNG from 2027, while Kyiv seeks autonomy over how the UN loan funds are spent. Ukraine reports 7 deaths from Russian strikes, including 2 children. Meanwhile, US Vice President Marco Rubio has stated that US still wants to meet Russia despite putting sanctions on them. The 151st Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union in Geneva, which ran from October 19 to 23rd, will wrap up today. The sessions addressed critical global issues such as humanitarian support and parliamentary cooperation. India also highlighted topics like food security and technological advancements in its parliamentary discussions. US Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Israel's parliament vote on West Bank annexation, calling it an insult and a stupid political stunt. His remarks come amidst ongoing diplomatic efforts to maintain the US-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Vance reiterated that the Trump administration opposed the annexation of the West Bank by Israel. The EU and Egypt have held their first joint summit, securing multiple loan deals, including one for €4 billion in European aid to Egypt. These loans come with favorable terms to support Egypt's reform program. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen emphasized expanding business opportunities in Egypt. Israeli military launched airstrikes on Hezbollah's alleged military camp in eastern Lebanon's Bekaa region near the Syrian border. Despite a November ceasefire, Israel has continued to target Lebanon, escalating tensions under US pressure. Lebanon plans to disarm Hezbollah, though the group and its allies oppose the move. The 151st Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union in Geneva is wrapping up a week of discussions on critical issues. The Assembly, which has been running from October 19 to 23rd, has seen delegates from around the world gathering to address humanitarian challenges and parliamentary cooperation. Key sessions have included debates on humanitarian norms and supporting action in crises, with a particular focus on developing an outcome document on these issues. Emergency items were also adopted, including a call for global parliamentary solidarity in Madagascar following a military takeover in the country. The Assembly also welcomed new members, including the Legislative Council of Brunei Darussalam and the Republic of Niger, which was readmitted after a period of suspension. In other developments, the IPU has launched a peace initiative in the Great Lakes region and have issued a statement expressing deep concern over the military takeover in Madagascar. India was also represented at the Assembly, with delegates discussing issues such as parliamentary resilience, food security, and advancements in technological and cyber measures. Pia Man is joining us live for more details on this story. Pia, what have been the big developments at the IPU today? Take us through the main highlights of the day's proceedings.
Absolutely, Uday. Today is the penultimate day of the Inter-Parliamentary Union's 151st Assembly here in Geneva. We've seen discussions that commenced on the 19th, focusing on human rights, humanitarian assistance, especially in times of crisis, food security, artificial intelligence, protection of children from illegal adoption, crackdown on child trafficking as well. Water security has been another key feature in discussions over here. Global warming, climate change, sustainable development has also been the key focus. Today, of course, is the day when all of these different topics are going to be sort of tied together and a final resolution will be voted upon by the members of parliament. Remember, Uday, there are MPs from over 183 countries that are currently present in Geneva, deliberating, discussing on all of these crucial issues, problems of today and tomorrow. And these 183 member nations and 15 associate members, they represent about 44,000 members of parliament cumulatively. Out of this, 26% are women, 27% are young parliamentarians, youth parliamentarians who are present over here discussing these very crucial issues. Right now, the main discussion for the adoption of the resolution is underway. We're expecting that to conclude by around 5:30 p.m. local time in Geneva.
What is the resolution expected to focus on, Pia?
As I said earlier, humanitarian assistance, especially in these crises. There are 120 global crises, 310 million plus people who've been affected by this. One of the crucial aspects that the parliamentarians here have raised is the protection of humanitarian aid workers. While we talk about humanitarian aid and assistance to people who are already suffering, let's say, a famine, these aid workers who are also perhaps caught up in between a war have also tragically lost their lives. We've seen this happen to doctors as well who are on the front lines working. So this has been one of the key issues that have been tabled, and the vote for this is going to take place very, very soon. Apart from this, of course, there's been a discussion on technology, how to use it, how it's been adopted in recent times, because we all know that it's a double-edged sword. Artificial intelligence is making lives easier for everyone, including children, including the elderly. But at the same time, there are concerns about deepfakes as well, the potential sort of havoc that AI can really wreak, because at the end of the day, it is not human, although it can mimic humans and in some ways even perform better, considering its capacity to do deep research in mere minutes or seconds for that matter. AI cannot really replicate the more emotional aspects of human beings and human intelligence as well. Food security has been a crucial issue. We do know that when it comes to global supply chains, because of certain tariff policies, protectionist policies, there have been a lot of bottlenecks that have been now identified. And of course, this remains one of the crucial aspects. Methane and methane emissions, reducing all of that has also been in focus, because climate change and sustainable development at the same time have been one of the core themes as well.
Pia, thank you for joining us with that ground report. Meanwhile, United States Vice President has slammed the move by Israeli far-right ministers to present bills aimed at annexing the West Bank. Vice President Vance stated that West Bank is not to be annexed by Israel and that the policy of the Trump administration regarding the West Bank will continue. Israeli lawmakers voted in favor of advancing two bills on annexing the occupied West Bank, an ambition openly promoted by far-right ministers in recent months. Meanwhile, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has stressed that the government opposes the bill. He called the vote a political move by the opposition. Vance also said that during his visit to Israel, he made progress on the composition of the International Stabilization Force. He reiterated that no American troops would be on the ground. However, they would help supervise and mediate peace. Vice President Vance described the move as a political stunt and said it was insulting to him as well.
I mean, look, if it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel. The policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel. That will continue to be our policy.
Xavier Abu, Eid political analyst, is joining us live from Amman. Xavier, what do you make of these latest statements by the United States Vice President? He's expressed his strong disapproval of these bills proposed by Israeli lawmakers to annex the West Bank.
Thank you for having me here. Yeah, it's true. He's reaffirming a position that already President Donald Trump has given a few weeks ago. I think it's a very interesting development because so far we have been void of a US policy in the region. We have seen changes of policies in the US, or at least of their discourse, for at least each 2 or 3 weeks. Now it seems that after the Gaza ceasefire deal was reached, the US is trying to articulate a sort of policy for the region, and perhaps after having heard from Arab countries, the US understands the importance of preventing the annexation of the occupied West Bank.
Also, Xavier, we do believe that, of course, the United States Vice President has spoken also about the next steps ahead. What is the way forward now after the hostages release and the body swap that is taking place?
I think that it's very important for people to understand that this is not the end of the conflict, right? I mean, the occupation remains, colonization remains. The Israeli forces are still on over 53% of Gaza. In the occupied West Bank, the colonization continues. And I think it's very important to understand that even though Israel has not made an official announcement of annexation, if we are to look into what the International Court of Justice concluded last year, we already have a situation of de facto annexation for whoever lives in the occupied West Bank. We all know that everything is controlled by Israel, and they continue to expand the colonial settler enterprise. So I think the future deals with the fact that the international community requires to have an end to the Israeli occupation. And I think President Trump understands that he needs a solution, not the biased solution that he pushed for on his first term, but a solution that understands also the interests of others in the region, including, of course, Palestine. Let's remember that so far, President Trump has not received President Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, in the White House. And I think also we should remember that so far the diplomatic relations between Palestine and the US virtually, they don't exist.
Right. In fact, in further developments that we're tracking, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio is scheduled to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel as he travels there. Before departing, he commented on West Bank annexation bill put forward in Knesset. The U.S. Secretary of State said that move by Israel's parliament towards annexation of the West Bank would threaten Washington's plan to end the conflict in Gaza. He further said that the U.S. could not support such a move at this time, as it would undermine efforts to maintain the fragile ceasefire deal. His visit to Israel is the latest by a senior U.S. official aimed at keeping the fragile truce deal between Israel and Hamas alive after 2 years of devastating war that has upended the Middle East. Xavier Abu Eid, the political analyst, is joining us live from Amman. Xavier, let me begin by asking you about this proposed visit by the United States Secretary of State to Israel. What is to be expected in this key meeting between Marco Rubio and Benjamin Netanyahu?
Certainly, Uday, it's a very significant meeting because Marco Rubio has historically been one of the most pro-Israeli members of the U.S. Congress. Now, on his role as the Secretary of State, he has to represent the state's policy. It's not just what he believes as someone who was heavily funded by the Zionist lobby in the U.S., by AIPAC. And I think it's important that, since he has already reminded Benjamin Netanyahu of the importance of keeping commitments, particularly by avoiding to declare an official annexation of the occupied West Bank, I think he may be visiting now this time to talk business, and to talk business particularly with what's required to advance into a second stage of the Gaza ceasefire deal. Let's remember, Uday, I think it's very important to understand that what we have is simply a ceasefire framework or an agreement, but we don't have a peace plan here. So I think what's important is how we can turn this momentum that has been built so far in the region in order to advance towards ending the Israeli occupation, which is the main need in order to achieve a political solution.
Okay, let me in fact quickly turn to now more developments coming in this hour. An organization representing international media in Israel and the Palestinian territories has expressed its disappointment on Thursday after Israel's top court postponed its hearing on granting journalists independent access to Gaza. Since the Gaza war began in October 2023, Israeli authorities have prevented foreign journalists from entering the devastated territory, taking only a handful of reporters inside on tightly controlled visits alongside its troops. The Foreign Press Association, which represents hundreds of foreign journalists had filed a petition in the Supreme Court seeking access for international journalists to Gaza. However, the court held its first hearing on Thursday, and the state attorney acknowledged that the situation has changed since the Gaza ceasefire and requested a further 30 days to examine the circumstances. Well, let's in fact listening to what one of the members of the foreign...
We're disappointed. We did not get what we wanted exactly. We were hoping that the court would order the state to open the border immediately. This is something that we have been working on and fighting for the past 2 years. We didn't get what we wanted, but on the other hand, the court did acknowledge that circumstances have changed. We're now in a ceasefire, and it's given the state 30 days to come up with a new plan on how to let journalists in there. Safety issues. Roughly 200 Palestinian journalists have been killed during this conflict. So we want to, and we appreciate everything they've done, but we think that the independence and having outside media it's going to give a fuller picture. The Army, of course, has given embed opportunities, escorts to reporters to go in there, but these have been very limited and highly controlled. So the more transparency, the more journalists doing their work, the better picture the world has of what's going on inside.
Xavier Aboui, the political analyst, is live with us from Amman on this big story. Xavier, what do you make of this ruling by the Supreme Court, something which has been called disappointing by foreign press associations? Obviously, access to Gaza has been further denied for a few days at least. More.
Well, let us remember that Israeli courts had a background of siding in many occasions with policies by the state that are illegal, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. We cannot claim that Israeli courts are courts that would bring justice under liberal Western standards as Israel claims to be. Now, regarding what the Foreign Press Association has been requesting, I think it's important to always highlight that for over 2 years, Israel has prevented foreign media from entering Gaza, but has also targeted Palestinian journalists. It's not just that over 200 Palestinian journalists have died. They have been killed, and there has been evidence of some of those journalists being targeted, being harassed, being persecuted by Israeli occupation forces. This is not something new. We also have persecution against journalists here in the occupied West Bank. We had the killing of Al Jazeera correspondent Shireen Abu Akleh, which was one of the most important figures, not only on Palestinian, but also on Arab journalism. So when we're talking about Israeli obstacles for foreign media to present what's happening on the ground, it's not something new. And I think that's something very important to be highlighted at this stage.
All right, let me in fact quickly turn to some more news coming in this hour. Israeli military has launched a series of strikes on mountainous areas, allegedly targeting Hezbollah's military camp in eastern Lebanon on Thursday. According to Lebanon's official national news agency, Israeli warplanes launched a series of violent strikes on the eastern mountain range in the Bekaa region near the border with Syria. Israel has repeatedly bombed Lebanon despite a November ceasefire that brought to an end more than a year of hostilities with the militant group Hezbollah. Meanwhile, under U.S. pressure and fearing an escalation of Israeli strikes, the Lebanese government has moved to begin disarming Hezbollah, a plan which the militant movement and its allies oppose. Xavier Aboui, the political analyst, is joining us live from Amman. What do you make of this, these latest strikes, of course, in Lebanon, and what the fallout of them will be?
Well, it is certainly very bad news for people that are following the prospects of having a peace deal in the region. Why? Because this is precisely what Palestinians fear from the ceasefire deal in Gaza. In fact, dozens of Palestinians have been killed after the ceasefire has been announced by Israeli forces. And now what we're witnessing in Lebanon, again, is not something new. It's something that it has become very regular. Israel continues not only to attack positions in Lebanon, often targeting also civilians, but also they have taken 5 spots on Lebanese territory that they are occupying with military bases. That's not part of the ceasefire agreement. And I think it's important now that the US that they have been putting pressure in order to continue with the process of a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel to put real pressure. Let's never forget that even though the US is putting pressure now on Israel, are US weapons that are doing the job there for Israel to continue terrorizing people in Lebanon, in Syria, and also in Palestine. So in other words, I think this shows the fragility of the situation we are having now, and hopefully and the international community will understand the urgency to act fastly in order to end this Israeli aggression against the peoples of the region.
Thank you very much, Xavier Abouid, for joining us. A Belfast court has acquitted Soldier F of murder charges related to the 1972 Bloody Sunday killings, in which 13 unarmed Catholic protesters were shot dead by the British Army during a civil rights march in Londonderry. The trial, which concluded on Thursday, 23 October, found the soldier not guilty of killing 2 men and attempting to kill 5 others, despite an official apology from the British government in 2010 acknowledging the killings as unjustified and unjustifiable. Efforts to prosecute those responsible had failed until now. The court highlighted that Soldier F's defense relied on unverified military statements from over 50 years ago, with no independent evidence to back the prosecution's case. During the trial, Soldier F declined to testify, citing poor recollection of the events. The verdict has sparked anger, especially from Northern Ireland's First Minister Michelle O'Neill, who has condemned the outcome, emphasizing the continued denial of justice for the victims' families. Bloody Sunday remains one of the most defining and controversial events of the Northern Ireland Troubles. This is what the Bloody Sunday families represent and a brother of one of the 2 murdered civilians had to say.
Soldier F has been discharged from the defendant's criminal dock, but it is 1 million miles away from being an honourable discharge. Unlike his victims, there has been no declaration of Soldier F's innocence. Soldier F created 2 young widows on Bloody Sunday. He orphaned 12 children, and he deprived dozens of siblings of a loving brother. The Bloody Sunday families do not lay the blame for today's decision on the trial judge. The blame lies firmly with the British state.
Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, is joining us live from Minneapolis. Andrew, thank you for being with us on NewsX World. How do you view this verdict? Andrew, can you hear me?
Yeah. The verdict is not unexpected. Okay. There simply wasn't sufficient evidence. It's been over 50 years since this event. As the judge pointed out, memories fade, recollections are distorted by news coverage in the intervening 5 decades. It really turns, though, on a question of what is justice. Everybody wants justice. Is justice accountability? The British state and the British Army did things which violated basic human norms of justice and right conduct. They killed 13 innocent civilians who were merely marching for their civil rights in the context of a broader civil rights campaign. That's one definition of justice. The other one is fairness. This particular soldier being held accountable, quote unquote, 50 years after the fact on the basis of a problematic, shall we say, evidence. That's not fair. And so I think the judge had a very difficult task, wanting to deliver accountability for the British state and the British Army, but also fairness for Soldier F, a real live human being. And following his training as a British judge, he decided that there simply wasn't evidence to convict here on the basis of meeting the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. And therefore, he had no choice but to acquit Soldier F. Not to say that Soldier F was innocent in some metaphysical sense, but strictly in legal terms, he was found not guilty.
What do you believe the ramifications of this verdict are really going to be on public life and also the governments?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a little bit. Can you repeat the question?
What do you believe the ramifications of this verdict really are going to be on the public that's been following this trial with great detail, and also the government?
Yeah, again, I didn't catch all of the question, but I think it's important to look at the political implications of this verdict. So it was a legal proceeding. It was a court of law, and most people in the free world understand what that means. But it had political knock-on effects. It undermines, in the context of a peace process, which is now 30 years old in Northern Ireland, it undermines the trust of the Irish nationalist, sometimes referred to as Catholic community in the British state. And that's going to undermine confidence in the peace process and maybe encourage some parties to restart or reignite the troubles, as they like to euphemistically call the conflict there. On the other hand, it has reassured people on the other side of that divide, the Unionists, the Nationalists, sometimes called the Protestants, who think that justice has been done, that no soldier should be tried for an act he committed under orders 50 years ago in a very complicated situation. So it's going to, and of course, First Minister O'Neill comes out of that Irish nationalist Catholic community. Of course, she's disappointed. Do I think that the institutions that have been built are robust and resilient enough to withstand this shock? Yes, I do. But there's no doubt we're in for a little bit of turbulence in the near future.
All right, Andrew, thank you for joining us with those details. Moving on now, in a historic moment, King Charles and Pope Leo have prayed together in the Vatican Sistine Chapel, marking the first joint worship between a British monarch and a Catholic pontiff since King Henry VIII's split with Rome in 1534. The service, which featured Latin chants and English prayers, took place under the famous frescoes by Michelangelo. Pope Leo, who was elected as the first US Pope just 6 months ago, led the service alongside Anglican Archbishop Stephen Cottrell. This momentous prayer service is a significant part of the state visit by King Charles and Queen Camilla to the Vatican, which celebrates the improved relationship between the Catholic Church and the Anglican Communion. Earlier in the day, the royal couple had a private meeting with Pope Leo. In the afternoon, King Charles and Queen Camilla will visit Rome's Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls, where Charles will be presented with a special seat in the apse of the Basilica. And that's a wrap on World Report. Stay tuned to NewsX World.